Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Imperfectly Yours, Titans of Manhattan, Book 2, by Anise Storm, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Elsa. The early summer wedding was beautiful, and I couldn't help but tear up at the sight of the bride and groom. Events like these were always so romantic, and as Anton squeezed my hand, I couldn't help allowing my thoughts to imagine everyone watching the two of us exchange vows, just as Caspian Archer and Paisley Fisher were currently doing. I had actually entertained thoughts like this for a while, and it seemed as if every wedding we attended, the more fervorous I became to plan my own. My imagination would run wild with the possibilities. Sometimes I'd be in a grand castle, where I'd descend the stairs like a true princess on my father's arm. At other times, I'd be on some deserted stretch of coastline and on an exotic island. The more I pictured that one, the clearer it all became. I'd be in a custom gown with my feet in the sand, and my long hair would be blowing in the breeze. It would be absolutely amazing, so much so that I actually sighed aloud. $1 for your thoughts, Anton whispered when he leaned in toward me. Or several, if they're dirty. A giggle escaped from my lips, and I tilted my head to the side and stared up at the man I loved. From the first moment I laid eyes on him, I knew my life would never be the same again, and I hadn't been wrong. I'd gone from attending black-tie social events with the society snobs I grew up with to gracing various red carpets and movie premieres at his side. It shouldn't have been a far cry from the normal social gatherings of my youth, but Hollywood was a completely different beast than New York City. Once we had gotten together, I assumed he would want to stay in Los Angeles, but he'd surprised me by announcing he was moving closer to me permanently versus the other way around. I could keep my career centered firmly where it was, and he'd be the one to do the commuting. Sexy and so considerate. How did I get so lucky? I wasn't the only one who'd experienced a bit of luck when it came to finding true love. Paisley had landed her own Titan, and now I was at the wedding of the year with one of the hottest men in the world, and one woman fawned over internationally. I was at the pinnacle of my career and had a wonderful relationship. Only 2 things were missing, and as my eyes watered, I refused to ruin this joyous occasion by selfishly thinking about myself. I remembered his question and pursed my lips together before giving him a quick peck. I guess you'll have to wait until later to find out. I'm going to hold you to that, he warned, causing me to shiver. Anton then picked my hand back up and held it between both of his. I eventually turned my attention away from him and back to the event taking place. It hadn't been that long ago when I met Paisley, having helped her land some commercial space for her art studio, which was doing very well. The location was prime, and her talent was immense. In fact, I had purchased several pieces myself that either hung on in my own place or were used when I would stage some of the luxury properties I sold. She made a gorgeous bride, and the love she had for her husband was noticeable, as was his for her. I'd always known of Caspian Archer, but I'd never really had any interaction with him until I started dating Anton. The men were considered titans, when in reality they were just powerful and successful men who commanded the attention of those around them. That much had been true the first time I met the love of my life. I'd been tasked to help a client find a penthouse on Park Avenue. It wasn't any different than any other day until he walked into my office, and the man my friends and I had been drooling over at the theater the weekend before stood there before me. My heart didn't just skip a beat, but several of them, as I realized I would be working with one of Hollywood's sexiest leading men. He was charismatic and well-spoken. And did I mention he was hot enough to melt my panties right off me? I hadn't wanted to mix business with pleasure, however, so I kept things as professional as I could. I tried to ignore his blatant flirting in the beginning, even patting my own back for not engaging. I managed to show him the penthouse, which he loved, then placed his offer. When it came back a few days later, I called him to my office to discuss it. There'd been some terms listed inside of it, and one of those included a favor from him for the seller's tween daughter. I was sure he would decline, and I wouldn't blame him if he had, but surprisingly, Anton had been cool with the autographs and photo op. That was such a nice thing to do, I told him when it was over, and the offer was accepted. I'm not the player you think I am, he replied. and for the first time I started to believe he was right. Or maybe you're just really good at playing the game. My slight jab quickly backfired. Anton had risen from his seat and walked around to my side of the desk. I'd been trapped between the wall and this man whose quiet arrogance aroused me like no other had ever done. I'm good at many things, sweetheart. Now that our business has concluded, let me take you out and show you what those things are. I had hesitated, but reluctantly agreed to one dinner. I was sure he would take me somewhere in the city before bringing me back to the hotel he was staying in. I'd been wrong that night because he'd been a complete gentleman. While his sexual prowess went without words, he was right about being good at many things. I never envisioned golfing at Tribeca's only 18-hole miniature golf course as being one of those. He'd also taken me for a helicopter ride over the city as well as a private boat ride around the harbor. Despite the effort he took in trying to blend in with everyone else, he was recognized almost everywhere we went. Surprisingly, he didn't let his fame affect him. He was the same whether we were alone or surrounded by hordes of women wanting him to take selfies with them for social media. If all of it had been bait, then he eventually reeled me in, hook, line, and sinker, because by the third date, we'd had sex for the first time. There were so many things already on my list of stuff he was good at, and all of it was pushed down as his sexual abilities rose to the top. Everything about the man was sinful, and nothing had changed in all the time we'd been dating. Dating. Aren't you two going to tie the knot anytime soon? One of my friends would ask. Normally it was Haley, Mary, or Carrie to ask, but this time it was Clara. The women hadn't hit it off with Paisley, which was a shame. I'd known them almost all of my life. My parents and grandparents were in the pharmaceutical business, and they ran in the same circles as the relatives of these other women. New York City was like that. You had a mix of old and new money with a bit of celebrity added in. I fit into the former, while the man currently running his hand up my thigh fell into the latter. "You're being naughty today," I told him, and then grinned. Anton was actually only in town for a week before he'd have to go back to China, where the latest movie of his was being filmed. It was hard to have him for so short of a time, but it was the life I signed on to when we started dating. He was so intense at first, so the small breaks did our relationship good, but now I wanted more than late-night Skype meetings with him or phone calls between scenes. I wanted to have the life I knew Paisley was going to have. I wanted it all, however, and not just marriage. "We need a grandchild," my mother would tell me more times than not. I wanted a child almost more than anything else in the world, but I was super busy in my career and, well, Anton, he hadn't even broached the subject once in all the time we'd been dating. Right now, we shared a penthouse, but that was as committed as we were. The place could be easily sold if something happened to us. After there'd be nothing else tying us to one another, and we'd just move on. He'd likely do so a lot easier than me, but it could happen. My heart clenched in my chest at the very thought of me not being with this man. As his hand continued its ascent up my thigh, I placed my hand over his to still it. I looked up at him and was about to say something when the crowd broke into applause. Everyone rose to their feet, including us, as Caspian and Paisley hurried down the aisle and back into the house. The vows were over, and now we would all gather to party the night away. Anton and I soon followed everyone else, and the after-party was everything the Manhattan social scene was known for. I danced so much that my feet were aching. Well, maybe it also had something to do with the 7-inch Manolo Blahnik heels I chose to wear for the occasion. I endured the pain in my ankles and didn't deny my dashing date a single dance. I honestly thought he was enjoying my ass rubbing against him more, but it was great foreplay for what would be the final act once we left. Before we could duck out and leave, however, there were the best men's speeches. Caspian had not only chosen Anton to speak on his behalf, but also 2 other close friends of theirs. Jonas Cortland, or JC, as he was known throughout the borough, was a hotel developer with resort properties all over the world. Mason Steele was an architect and nightclub developer. Both titans, they also possessed a lot of the same qualities Anton and Caspian did. When that part of the event was over, Paisley threw the bouquet, and I felt no shame in knocking Mary over to catch it.